I came home early to find a strange perfume in my house. Then I overheard my husband breaking up with his lover. His own stepsister, the same girl who bullied me in high school. My father-in-law, my trusted assistant, was covering for them. They thought I was just a wife they could betray. They forgot what the military taught me about dealing with threats. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining me. It's taken me a long time to get to a place where I can even talk about this. To put the words in order and speak them out loud. But I feel like I have to. For me. And maybe, just maybe, for someone else out there who feels trapped and needs to hear that they're not alone. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My name is Eleanor, but my friends call me Ellie. For most of my adult life, my world has been a fortress, one that I built myself, brick by brick. A fortress built on discipline, on order, and on an unwavering belief in control. You see, long before I founded my company, Vance Security Consultants, I spent 10 years in the military. Those weren't just years on a resume, they were the crucible that forged the woman I am today. The military taught me to see the world in systems, in patterns, in cause and effect. It gave me a sharp eye for inconsistencies, for the one detail that's out of place, the one loose thread that can unravel everything. It's a skill that made me exceptionally good at my job. It's also the skill that made me the first to realize the walls of my own perfect fortress were about to come crashing down. My company is my baby. We design and implement high-level security systems for clients who demand nothing less than perfection. Precision and integrity aren't just buzzwords on our website, they are the foundation of everything I do. It's a no-nonsense approach I carried into my personal life. I believed in accountability. I believed in loyalty. And I truly thought, that I had built my marriage with the same meticulous care, the same unbreakable code, that I used for my most important clients. My husband, Daniel, I always called him Danny, was supposed to be the safe harbor in my structured world. He worked part-time at a local library, a quiet, gentle job that seemed to fit him perfectly. We'd been married for 6 years, a partnership that I saw as stable, comfortable, and secure. Or so I believed. And then there was Arthur. Arthur was my father-in-law. Danny's dad. He was also my executive assistant. After he retired from his own career as an office manager, I'd brought him on board. He'd been with me since the early days of the company, a calm, efficient presence I trusted implicitly. He wasn't just family, and he wasn't just an employee. He was my right hand, my confidant, my friend. The idea that Arthur could deceive me was as foreign and impossible as the sun rising in the west. My life was a well-oiled machine. Tidy, predictable, secure. But the thing about machines, as anyone in my line of work will tell you, is that it only takes one loose screw, one tiny, imperceptible flaw, for the whole thing to start rattling apart. For me, that rattle began on a completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I'd just returned to the office after a productive lunch meeting, my mind already mapping out the next phase of a major project, a complete security overhaul for an aging downtown hospital. I'd spent the weekend brainstorming, filling my personal laptop with drafts, blueprints, and preliminary threat assessments. Back at my desk, I reached into my briefcase, my fingers searching for the familiar cool metal of the laptop casing. My hand met nothing but the soft leather interior. My stomach did a familiar, frustrating flip. I'd left it at home. On the dresser. It was a rookie mistake, a lapse in my own protocol, and I was instantly annoyed with myself. Arthur, I called out, leaning through my office doorway. I've got to run home for a bit. I left my laptop behind like a complete amateur. Arthur was on the phone, which was standard. He was a social butterfly, but he was also a master of efficiency. I never had any complaints. He looked up, gave me a warm smile, and held up a finger. No problem at all, Ellie. Drive safe. As I turned to leave, I walked past his desk. I heard him lower his voice slightly, a subtle shift in tone, a new urgency in his words as he spoke into the receiver. Yeah, she's on her way now. You need to hurry. I hesitated for just a beat, the odd phrasing snagging my attention. But then Arthur was chuckling, saying something into the phone about forgetting his own head if it wasn't attached, and I brushed it off. It was probably just a delivery driver or a courier. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door and headed for the parking garage. It wasn't until I was on the freeway, the city skyline shrinking in my rearview mirror, that I replayed his words in my head. She's on her way now. You need to hurry. Who was she? And why the sudden rush? It was a small thing, a tiny hairline crack in the smooth facade of my day, but it was there. And it was just the beginning. The drive home was quick, maybe 15 minutes against the light afternoon traffic. I pulled into the driveway. Danny's car was there, which was normal for a Tuesday. I used my key to let myself in the front door, the familiar click echoing in the quiet entryway. Danny? It's me! I called out. Just running in to grab my laptop. He appeared at the top of the stairs almost instantly, looking startled, like my voice had been a gunshot. His face was flushed, and I could see the rapid rise and fall of his chest. He was holding a laundry basket, gripping the plastic sides with white knuckles. Ellie. Hey, honey. You're home early, he said, his voice a little too high, a little too bright. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. Just forgot my work laptop, I explained, starting up the stairs. My brain decided to take the afternoon off, I guess. Oh, right. I was just, getting a load of laundry started, he said, gesturing with the basket as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It seemed plausible. He often took care of household chores on his days off. I reached the landing and gave him a quick peck on the cheek as I passed. He felt warm. I brushed past him and walked into our bedroom. The laptop was sitting right on the dresser, exactly where I'd left it. A wave of relief washed over me. The bed was unmade, clothes were draped over a chair, the usual comfortable mess of our shared life. I felt a pang of guilt for my earlier paranoia. I was just stressed. I decided to splash some cool water on my face before heading back. I walked into our adjoining master bathroom and I froze. The toilet seat was up. Now, I know how that sounds. A toilet seat. It's the punchline to 1,000 jokes about marriage. But you have to understand our dynamic. For 6 years, this was our thing. Danny was meticulous about it. He was the one who always, without fail, put the seat down. I was the forgetful one. It was a running gag, a small, silly point of contention that was woven into the fabric of our life together. He never left it up. Ever. A strange, cold knot began to form in the pit of my stomach. It made no sense. It was a detail that was fundamentally, jarringly wrong. I mechanically reached out, put the seat down, and turned on the faucet, the sound of the running water loud in the sudden silence. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale. I was being ridiculous. It was just a toilet seat. I dried my hands and walked back out into the hallway. Danny was still there, now pretending to be engrossed in folding a single bath towel with an almost comical level of concentration. Got it? He asked, his eyes focused intently on the task at hand. Yep, all set, I said, trying to keep my voice light. I paused at the bedroom door, my laptop now clutched in my hand like a shield. Hey, honey? You feeling all right? You left the toilet seat up. He stopped folding. Just for a second. His hands went still on the soft terry cloth. I saw a flicker of something raw in his eyes. It looked like pure, unadulterated panic. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, papered over with a nervous laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Oh. Wow, did I really? Guess my head is totally somewhere else today. Must be your bad influence finally rubbing off on me after all these years. He tried to play it off, to turn it into our old joke. But his recovery was a fraction of a second too slow. The laugh was brittle. Something was profoundly, deeply wrong. I could feel it in my gut, the same primal instinct a soldier feels when the birds suddenly go silent in the jungle. I forced a smile and headed downstairs. As I stepped from the kitchen into the garage, I was hit by it. A scent. It was faint, but it was there, hanging in the still air. Perfume. It was a sweet, slightly cloying scent, something with vanilla and maybe gardenia. It was a scent I had never smelled before. It certainly wasn't mine. I preferred clean, citrusy fragrances. And it wasn't something Danny would ever wear. I stood there for a moment, turning my head, trying to pinpoint the source. It was just everywhere. Dispersed. Lingering. I scanned the garage. No open containers, no fallen air fresheners. Nothing. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of suspicion. I was being paranoid. I was connecting unrelated dots. A raised toilet seat and a strange smell. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. But as I pulled out of the driveway and headed back to the office, the two anomalies began to merge in my mind. They weren't separate incidents. They were puzzle pieces. And my military-trained brain, the part of me that I could never turn off, was starting to assemble a picture I was desperately, terrifyingly afraid to see. For the rest of that day and all through Wednesday, I lived in a state of self-imposed denial. I threw myself into my work, burying myself in spreadsheets and security protocols, trying to silence the nagging voice in the back of my head. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was letting the stress of a demanding career bleed into my personal life, making me see threats where there were none. But the little inconsistencies kept replaying in my mind, like a piece of surveillance footage I couldn't stop watching. Wednesday evening, I got home before Danny. The house was quiet. The strange perfume smell in the garage was gone. I felt a wave of relief. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe a neighbor had been spraying something. I decided to be productive, to do something normal. I went to the laundry room to fold the load of clothes Danny had supposedly started the day before. I opened the dryer door. The metal drum was empty, except for one solitary, neatly folded pile. I pulled it out. It was our bedsheets. Just the fitted sheet, the top sheet, and the two pillowcases. Nothing else. I stood there in the quiet laundry room, holding the still warm sheets in my hands. The knot in my stomach returned, tighter this time. Who runs an entire drying cycle for a single set of sheets? It was a colossal waste of energy, and Danny, who was meticulous about our utility bills, would never do that. It was just wrong. My mind started racing. I walked back upstairs, the clean sheets in my arms, and another piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening thud. I distinctly remembered Danny making the bed on Tuesday morning. We had a very specific routine. He always made the bed while I was in the shower. It was one of the small, consistent acts of service that defined our marriage. So why? Why would he make the bed, only to strip it bare and wash the sheets in the middle of the afternoon? It was completely illogical. Wildly inefficient. It was not something my husband would do. Unless he had a very specific reason to wash them. A reason he didn't want me to know about. I went to bed that night feeling a profound, bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I lay there in the dark, next to the man I had shared my life with for 6 years, and for the first time, he felt like a complete stranger. The small anomalies weren't just quirks anymore. They weren't coincidences. They were red flags. They were evidence. But evidence of what? I didn't want to know. God, I really didn't want to know. I tried to talk to him about it over dinner that night. I kept my tone casual, feigning a simple curiosity I was far from feeling. We were eating leftovers, a comfortable silence settling between us. But it wasn't comfortable anymore. It felt heavy, charged with everything I couldn't say. "Hey," I started, pushing a piece of broccoli around my plate. "It's so weird, I keep thinking about that perfume I smelled in the garage yesterday. Did one of your friends from the library get a ride in your car recently or something?" He looked up from his plate, his expression a carefully constructed mask of innocence. "Perfume? Honey, I told you, I didn't smell anything." "What did it smell like again?" "I don't know," I said, watching his eyes for any flicker of deceit. "Kind of sweet. Musky. Vanilla, maybe." He just shrugged, a picture of nonchalance. "Beats me. Maybe someone from next door was spraying something and it drifted over. Don't worry about it." He immediately changed the subject, asking about a difficult client I'd been dealing with. I let him steer the conversation into safe waters because I wasn't ready for the storm. The wall between us was getting higher with every lie. We finished our meal. We cleaned the kitchen together. We cuddled on the couch and watched a show we both liked. We went through all the familiar motions of our life together, but it all felt hollow, like a stage play where I was the only one who didn't know her lines. That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. My mind was a command center on high alert, connecting dots, drawing lines between the toilet seat, the perfume, the single load of laundry, and Arthur's tense, urgent phone call. It was forming a picture. A horrifying, intimate, and undeniable picture of betrayal. Thursday morning, I woke up feeling sick. Not just emotionally, but physically ill. My head was pounding, my stomach was in knots, and a wave of vertigo washed over me the moment my feet hit the floor. I didn't say a word to Danny. I didn't want his fake sympathy. I choked down a couple of aspirin, mechanically went through my morning routine, and drove myself to work, telling myself it was just a 24-hour bug. But it wasn't. By the time I got to the office, the headache had intensified to a blinding throb, and the unease had become a constant, crushing pressure behind my eyes. I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen, but the letters and numbers just swam together in a meaningless jumble. I felt feverish, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. Arthur noticed right away. "Ellie, are you all right?" he asked, poking his head into my office around 10 o'clock. He brought me my morning coffee, just like he always did. "You look as white as a ghost." "I'm fine, Arthur. Just a headache," I lied, my voice sounding weak and distant even to my own ears. He wasn't buying it. He kept checking on me every half hour, his brow furrowed with what I, in my naive state, still believed was genuine fatherly concern. He brought me tea. He brought me water. By mid-afternoon, I knew I couldn't fake it any longer. The room was starting to tilt, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing like angry hornets. I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles white, and managed to push myself to my feet. I stumbled towards my office door, my vision tunneling. "Arthur," I managed to croak out. He was on his feet in a nanosecond, his chair scraping loudly against the polished concrete floor. "Ellie. My God, you look terrible." He rushed to my side, studying me as I swayed. He placed the back of his hand against my forehead, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You're burning up. That's it, I'm taking you home right now." He glanced at the clock on the wall, a quick, almost imperceptible flicker of his eyes. A detail I would remember later with chilling clarity. "You wait here in reception," he said, his voice all business. "I'll be right with you. I just need to make one quick call." I was too weak, too sick to argue. I just nodded, letting him guide me down the short hallway to the reception area. I sank onto one of the leather couches, my head spinning. I had to lean against the wall to stay upright, my breath coming in shallow gasps. And in that moment of forced stillness, in the relative quiet of the empty office, I heard his voice. It carried clearly from his desk down the hall. It was low, but it was sharp. Urgent. Danny, listen to me. Ellie's really sick. I'm bringing her home now. Don't freak out. Just deal with it. My blood turned to ice in my veins. Deal with it? Deal with what? Then his voice dropped even lower, becoming a venomous hiss I had never heard from the kind, gentle man I thought I knew. Tell her to leave. I don't care what she thinks. Get her out of there now. Her. The word wasn't just spoken, it was a projectile. It shot down the hallway and slammed into me with physical force. Her. The perfume. The toilet seat. The single load of sheets. It all crashed down on me in one single, devastating wave of understanding. There was a woman in my house. There was a woman in my bed with my husband. And my father-in-law, my trusted friend, my right-hand man, was their lookout. He was their accomplice. The next thing I knew, Arthur was helping me to my feet, his face a perfect mask of worried concern that I now saw for what it was, a grotesque, masterful lie. The betrayal was so total, so absolute, that my body simply gave up. It shut down. I vaguely remember him helping me into the passenger seat of his car. And then, everything went black. When I drifted back to consciousness, we were pulling into my driveway. The motion of the car stopping had roused me. Arthur was unbuckling my seatbelt, speaking to me in a low, soothing voice that now made my skin crawl. Danny was standing at the front door, waiting. His face was pale, his eyes wide with distress. But it was a different kind of distress now. It wasn't worry for his sick wife. It was the panic of a cornered animal. We should take her to the hospital, Danny said, his voice shaking as Arthur helped me out of the car. Nonsense, Arthur replied, his voice firm, taking charge. He put a steadying arm around my waist, guiding me towards the house. It's just a bad flu. She needs rest and quiet, not a noisy ER. Let's get her settled on the couch. She's too weak to manage the stairs. They guided me into the living room and helped me lie down on the sofa, covering me with a soft blanket. I was still in a fog, my body racked with fever, my mind shattered by the truth. I remember Arthur giving me a glass of juice, his hand brushing mine. The casual intimacy of the gesture was obscene. He promised to check on me later, then let himself out. I lay there, eyes closed, listening to his car drive away. As I drifted into a restless, feverish sleep, one thought burned through the haze, a single, damning word, repeating itself like a mantra of my broken life. Her. 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 I must have been in and out of it for a couple of hours. The fever was a heavy, suffocating blanket, making the world feel fuzzy and unreal. But at some point, I surfaced from the depths, pulled toward consciousness by the sound of a voice. It was Danny, in the kitchen, on the phone. His voice was a low, angry hiss, trying to keep it down but failing. Vanessa, we have to stop. I told you, this is over, he was saying. My heart stopped beating. Vanessa. No. It couldn't be. Not that Vanessa. His voice cut through my feverish haze again, each word a shard of glass in my ear. Ellie's here. She's sick, and she needs me. I'm not sneaking off to meet you at some motel. Today was the last straw. This whole thing was a mistake. My breath hitched in my throat. Vanessa. It was Danny's stepsister. Arthur had remarried about 10 years ago, to a woman named Patricia who had a teenage daughter from a previous marriage. Vanessa. She had no blood relation to Danny, but she was, for all intents and purposes, his sister. The betrayal twisted into something even more sick, more monstrously intimate. Don't you dare threaten me, Danny snapped into the phone, his voice rising. You don't know Ellie. She's not the same girl you used to push around in the hallways back in high school. If you try anything, I swear to God, she will destroy you. He slammed the phone down so hard the plastic cracked. The sound echoed in the suddenly silent house. I lay perfectly still on the couch, my eyes squeezed shut, the world spinning violently around me. It was worse than I could have possibly imagined. It wasn't just some random woman. It was his stepsister. And she was my high school tormentor. The memories, buried for over 20 years, came rushing back with sickening clarity. Vanessa Reed. A year behind me in school. Pretty, popular, and poisonously cruel. She and her little clique had made my life a living hell for an entire year, all because I had the audacity to accidentally spill a soda on her pristine white sneakers at a football game. The whispers in the hallway, the notes left in my locker, the rumors she spread with a vicious little smile. It was her. My husband was sleeping with my high school bully, who was also his stepsister. The sheer, twisted depravity of it all stole the air from my lungs. Then I heard the front door open and close softly. Arthur must have used his key to let himself back in. I heard his calm, resolute voice from the kitchen. "Good riddance," Arthur said. "You should have ended this whole mess months ago." "Dad, enough," Danny replied, his voice tight with stress. "It's over now. And Ellie doesn't know anything. Let's just leave it at that." They thought I didn't know. They thought I was just their poor, sick Ellie, passed out on the couch, blissfully unaware that they had just detonated a bomb in the middle of my life. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I needed them to keep thinking that. I let out a weak, pathetic little cough, a sound of pure misery. Instantly, they were both hovering over me, their faces perfect masks of loving concern. "Oh honey, did we wake you?" Danny asked, his voice dripping with fake sympathy as he smoothed the hair back from my forehead. I just shook my head, pretending my throat was too raw to speak. I pointed a trembling finger towards my mouth. They seemed visibly relieved. So incredibly, pathetically relieved. They rushed to get me another glass of cold juice, they fluffed my pillow, they fussed over my blanket. I let them. I sipped the juice they gave me, the sweetness tasting like poison in my mouth. My mind was a raging inferno of pain and betrayal. But on the outside, I was just Ellie. Weak, sick, helpless Ellie. For now, I chose silence. I would play their game. I would wait. My time in the military had taught me many things, but the most important lesson was this: you never, ever engage the enemy until you have a complete and total picture of the battlefield. And my battlefield, I now realized with horrifying clarity, was my own home. Friday was a blur of physical misery that perfectly mirrored my emotional state. I spent most of the day curled up in the downstairs bathroom, my body racked with relentless waves of sickness. The flu was real, a violent, purging illness. But it was nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the sickness that had taken root in my soul. Danny left for his part-time shift at the library around noon, and Arthur, after a morning check-in call filled with his disgustingly false concern, was busy at the office, covering for me. I was finally, blessedly alone. The solitude was my sanctuary. It gave me time to think, to process, to let the full, monstrous scope of their betrayal sink in. Between wretched bouts of heaving, the fragments of conversation I'd overheard began to assemble themselves into a coherent, damning timeline. Vanessa. His stepsister. My high school bully. The pieces clicked into place with the cold, hard finality of a prison door slamming shut. The perfume. The toilet seat. The single, desperate load of laundry. Arthur's panicked phone calls. It was a conspiracy. A sordid little family affair conducted in my home, on my sheets, under the nose of the woman who paid their salaries and signed their checks. By late afternoon, my stomach had finally settled. I managed to keep down some water, then some weak tea. I felt drained, but my mind was sharper than it had been in days. It was terrifyingly clear. When Danny came home from work an hour early, he seemed genuinely relieved to see me sitting up on the couch, propped up with pillows, reading a book. He fussed over me, reporting that he'd spoken to a nurse on a health hotline. She said it sounds like a nasty viral bug that's going around, he reported, all earnest concern. She said antibiotics won't help. Just lots of rest and fluids. He suggested, for the second time, that I would be much more comfortable upstairs in our bed. A fresh wave of nausea washed over me, and this one had nothing to do with the flu. The thought of lying in that bed, our bed, the bed where he had been with her, was physically repulsive. No, I said, my voice raspy but firm. I'm fine right here on the couch. He looked surprised, a little hurt even, but he didn't push it. He didn't have a clue. Later that evening, as I was pretending to doze, I opened my eyes slightly and asked him, "Is your dad coming by tomorrow? For the weekend?" "Oh, no, he and Patricia have plans," he said, a little too quickly. "They're going on a nature hike, I think. You know how Patricia loves her trails." It sounded plausible. It was a well-constructed lie. "Cancel them," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was flat. It held a tone he had never heard from me before. It wasn't a request. It was an order. "Tell him I need him to be here. I need you both here. Tomorrow. At noon." Danny just stared at me, a confused, uneasy look spreading across his face. But he saw something in my eyes, some new, hard glint of steel that made him back down. Without another word, he picked up his phone and walked into the kitchen. I could hear his hushed, urgent whisper. "Dad, you have to come over tomorrow. Noon." I don't know why, but I think she knows. I closed my eyes, a cold, calm sense of resolve washing over me. Oh, I knew. And they had no earthly idea what was coming for them. I spent the rest of the evening feigning a deep, exhausted sleep, but my mind was wide awake, working, planning, strategizing. Like a general on the eve of the most important battle of her life. The house phone rang once, late that night. I heard Danny snatch it up, and then his voice, raw with anger, shouting from the kitchen. "No, you idiot! I told you, never again. Screw you." He slammed the receiver down so hard I heard the plastic crack. It had to be her. Vanessa. Good. Let her be desperate. Let them all be scared. The storm was about to break. By Saturday morning, the fever had broken completely. I felt hollowed out, weak, but my body was my own again. I stood under the spray of a long, hot shower, letting the water sluice away the physical remnants of the illness, even though I knew no amount of soap and water could ever scrub away the filth I felt clinging to my soul. Dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a plain black t-shirt, I stood silently in the doorway of our bedroom. Danny was still asleep, his face peaceful in the morning light. It was strange. Looking at him, some deeply ingrained, biological part of me, the part conditioned by 6 years of habit, still felt a familiar pull. The muscle memory of love is a hard thing to break. But my mind was on Vanessa. I could see her face so clearly, the sneering, entitled smirk of the girl from my past. The anger I felt was a clean, sharp, hot thing. It was an old rage, buried for decades, now rekindled and magnified 1,000 times over by this new, intimate betrayal. But I ruthlessly pushed it down. Not yet. I had to be clinical. I had to be in control. I went downstairs and made myself a piece of toast and a cup of black tea. The clock on the microwave read 10:35 a.m. I took a pen and a sticky note from the junk drawer. I wrote 3 words, "back by noon." I stuck it to the refrigerator door where he couldn't miss it. I wanted to confront them together. I wasn't going to give them a single second to coordinate their lies. I got in my car and just drove. I had no destination. I ended up on the highway, driving aimlessly, the miles blurring by. My thoughts churned, circling the same impossible, undeniable point, betrayal. In my work, in my life, I could handle incompetence. I could forgive mistakes. What I could not, would not, ever tolerate was dishonesty. The deliberate, calculated act of looking someone you profess to love in the eye and lying to them. Danny hadn't just cheated. He had violated the very core of our marriage. And Arthur. Arthur had stood by and held the door open for him. He had violated my trust, a trust one had given him freely as a friend, as a father. Could I forgive them? Could I ever look at either of them again without seeing this? No. The answer was a cold, hard stone in my gut. No. But first, before I burned it all to the ground, I needed the full, unvarnished truth, spoken from their own cowardly mouths. At exactly 11:58 a.m., I pulled into my driveway. Arthur's sedan was already parked behind Danny's SUV. Perfect. Punctual. I walked inside. They were both sitting at the kitchen table, a heavy, suffocating silence hanging in the air between them. They looked up as I entered, their faces etched with a mixture of dread and confusion. I ignored them. I walked to the coffee pot, my movements deliberate and unhurried. I poured myself a mug with a steady hand and sat down at the head of the table, directly across from them. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch, letting it press down on them. I watched them squirm. Then, I began. "Thank you both for your care these past few days," I said, my tone perfectly even, almost pleasant. Arthur managed a weak, nervous smile. Danny just stared at the polished wood of the table. "Here's the situation," I continued, my voice dropping, losing every trace of warmth, becoming as flat and cold as a surgeon's scalpel. "I believe my husband, Danny, was sleeping with his stepsister, Vanessa Reed, in our bed, in this house, this past Tuesday and Thursday." I shifted my gaze to lock onto Arthur's. "And you, Dad, acted as their lookout. Am I wrong?" The color drained from Danny's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. Arthur flinched as if I'd struck him, his hand jerking and knocking his own coffee cup off the table. It shattered on the tile floor, dark liquid splashing across the clean white grout. They both leaped up, a frantic, clumsy scramble to clean up the mess, grabbing paper towels, bumping into each other. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to delay the inevitable. I didn't move a muscle. I just sat there, my hand wrapped around my warm mug, and I waited. Once they were seated again, the shattered ceramic swept into a dustpan, Danny opened his mouth. A weak, pathetic denial was forming on his lips, I could see it in his eyes. I raised a single hand, palm out, silencing him before he could utter a sound. "It is my turn to speak," I said, my voice like ice. "Danny. On Tuesday morning, you made the bed. A chore you only do if you're about to strip it for washing later that day. When I came home that afternoon, I smelled her perfume in the garage. It wasn't mine. Later, I found only one set of sheets in the dryer. Our sheets. Why? To get rid of the evidence, perhaps?" I didn't wait for an answer. I turned my cold gaze on Arthur. "And you, Dad? I heard you on the phone. I was in the hallway. On Tuesday, you told him to hurry because I was on my way. On Thursday, you told him to get her out of there. Don't you dare tell me I misheard you." Danny was openly shaking now, tears streaming down his face. "Ellie, this is all just a crazy misunderstanding. I've never cheated on you. There are perfectly logical explanations for all of it." "No more lies, Danny," I cut him off, my voice dangerously quiet, each word a precisely aimed dart. "If you want this marriage to have any chance at all, and I will tell you right now, that is a very, very slim chance, you will tell me the truth. Right now. Did you sleep with her? And I want you to think very carefully before you answer this next question. Did you use protection?" The silence in that kitchen was deafening. It was a physical presence, pressing in on us. I looked at the two men I had trusted most in the world, the two men who were supposed to be my family, and I saw nothing but cowardice and lies. It was the moment everything I thought I knew about my life turned to dust. It was the moment everything changed. If you're still listening, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below. That way, I'll know you gave me a like, and I'll know you're right here with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me. Please, comment with the number 1, and then listen to what happened next. Danny finally broke. A strangled sob tore from his throat, and he buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Arthur just sat there, frozen, looking like a statue carved from gray stone, his face a mask of utter ruin. After a long moment, Danny lifted his head. His face was a mess of tears and shame. "Yes," he whispered. The word was a bare thread of sound, but it landed like a bomb in the quiet room. It started a few months ago. After my high school reunion. I didn't go, but she was in town for hers. He stammered out the whole sordid story. Vanessa had reached out. They'd met for a drink, just to catch up. He knew it was wrong, he said, but he was flattered by the attention from the woman who had always been the cool, popular one. He painted it as a stupid mistake, a moment of weakness that had snowballed out of his control. He swore up and down that he had ended it, that the angry phone call I'd overheard was him telling her it was over for good. I leaned back in my chair, my face completely unreadable. The anger inside me was a white-hot bonfire, but on the outside, I was perfectly still, perfectly contained. "You didn't end it, Danny," I said, my voice flat. "Circumstances did. I got sick and came home unexpectedly. You got caught. That is not the same thing." My gaze shifted to Arthur. "And you," I said, my voice dripping with contempt. "You enabled this. You lied to my face every single day, in my company, in my home. Why? Give me one good reason." Arthur finally spoke, his voice hoarse and cracking. I was scared, Ellie. I was so scared. I was afraid of what you'd do if you found out. Afraid for Danny. I didn't want to see this family destroyed." "You already destroyed it," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "Both of you." I stood up then, the legs of my chair scraping harshly against the tile. The sound was final. "We'll finish this conversation later," I said, though we both knew there was nothing left to say. "After I decide what happens next." I walked out of the kitchen without a backward glance, leaving them sitting in the wreckage they had created. I went upstairs to the guest room, a room I had barely used in 6 years, and I locked the door behind me. There would be no saving this. There was no going back. The next steps wouldn't be about saving feelings or preserving a family that was already a sham. They would be about a clean, decisive extraction. A mission. And I knew, with absolute certainty, exactly how to execute it. That night, the guest room became my room. The next morning, Monday, was the beginning of my new life. My first stop was not a lawyer's office, but a walk-in clinic. I had a full panel of STD tests run. I didn't know where his stepsister had been, and I wasn't about to risk my health on top of everything else. I sent Danny a single, clinical text message: "I suggest you and Vanessa get tested immediately." He didn't reply. A week later, my results came back. Clean. It was the first piece of good news I'd had in what felt like a lifetime. But I knew there was another person caught in this web of lies who deserved to know the truth. That afternoon, I did some digging online and found a business listing for a freelance graphic designer named Warren Reed. Vanessa's husband. I stared at the phone number for a long time before I dialed. His voice was cautious when I introduced myself and said I needed to speak with him urgently about his wife. He was reluctant, understandably so, but my tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation. We agreed to meet at a quiet, neutral location, a small, independent coffee shop halfway between our homes. When Warren walked in, my first thought was that he looked exhausted. He was a handsome man, with kind, intelligent eyes, but they were shadowed with a deep, bone-deep weariness. He carried himself like a man who had been walking against a strong wind for a very long time. After we got our coffees and found a secluded booth in the back, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid out the whole ugly story. The affair with my husband, my father-in-law's complicity, everything I knew. He listened intently, his gaze never leaving my face. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he just nodded slowly, a sad, resigned look on his face. "I'm not surprised," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I've known she was cheating for years. This isn't the first time." My heart ached for him. Here was another victim, another piece of collateral damage in Vanessa's destructive wake. He explained that he had stayed for their 2 young children, a boy and a girl. He was their primary caregiver, working from home while Vanessa worked in a high-powered sales job that required frequent travel. He said he didn't have the concrete proof he needed to secure full custody in what he knew would be a brutal divorce. Then, he did something that shocked me. He pushed up the sleeve of his left arm. Faded, yellowish bruises dotted his forearm, the ghost of fingerprints clearly visible. "She has a bad temper," he said, his voice flat, completely devoid of emotion. "It's been getting worse. She gets frustrated, stressed from work, and she takes it out on me. Never the kids," he added quickly, a fierce, protective light in his eyes. "Thank God. Just me." A hot flash of pure, unadulterated rage crawled up my neck. This went far beyond infidelity. This was monstrous. "Warren," I said, my voice low and intense. "You need to get yourself and your children out of there. Now." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. He looked down at his hands, wrapped around his coffee cup. "But how? She'd make my life hell. She'd lie, she'd twist everything around, she'd tell the court I was the unstable one." We sat in silence for a long moment, 2 complete strangers bound together by the same toxic person. Then, he looked up at me, a flicker of something new, recognition, dawning in his eyes. "Wait a second," he said slowly. "Vance. Eleanor Vance. Did you go to Northwood High School?" I nodded, confused by the sudden shift. "I remember you," he said, a small, sad smile touching his lips for the first time. "You were the tall, quiet girl who was always reading in the library. You stood up for me once. At the winter formal dance." The memory, buried under 2 decades of life, came rushing back with startling clarity. A crowded, noisy gymnasium. The cloying smell of cheap punch and hairspray. A popular, nasty girl named Brenda and her friends had cornered Warren near the bleachers, taunting him, trying to provoke him. I don't know what came over me. I was usually so adept at being invisible. But I saw the raw fear in his eyes, and something inside me just snapped. I walked right up to Brenda, who was a head shorter than me, looked her dead in the eye, and told her to back off and leave him alone. She was so stunned by my audacity that she was momentarily speechless. It was enough time for Warren to slip away into the crowd. Of course, Brenda and her clique made my life miserable for the next month, but it had been worth it. "I never forgot that," Warren said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "You were so incredibly brave." "I got a week's suspension," I said with a wry smile. "The administration said I incited a conflict. It was part of what convinced me to just graduate early and enlist in the military." We talked for another hour, not as victims, but as something else. Something stronger. It turned out that after that incident, I had become a sort of quiet legend to him and his small group of nerdy friends. He told me he had always admired my strength, my willingness to stand up when no one else would. By the time we left that coffee shop, it was clear we weren't just strangers anymore. We were allies. 2 survivors of the same, long-raging storm. As we parted ways, he promised he would finally start talking to a lawyer. I promised I would help him in any way I could. Driving back to my office, my resolve hardened into something unbreakable. This wasn't just about my broken marriage anymore. This was about justice. For me. For Warren. And for his children. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in efficiency. I operated not like a heartbroken wife, but like a commander executing a complex military campaign. The mission had a name, Operation Freedom. My first move was to sit down with my own lawyer. He was a sharp, aggressive man in his 60s who specialized in high-acid divorce cases and had a reputation for being a shark. I laid out the entire situation, holding nothing back. He listened, his face impassive, and when I was done, he gave a curt nod. He assured me we could push for a quick, clean settlement. Given the circumstances, especially the involvement of a family member, he was confident Danny wouldn't dare contest it. And he was right. Next on the list was Arthur. I called him into my office, the same office where he had sat for years, managing my schedule, taking my calls, and all the while, lying to my face. He came in looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't show him a single shred of the rage and pain that was churning inside me. I simply informed him, in a calm, professional tone, that his position as executive assistant was being eliminated as part of a necessary corporate restructuring. However, because of his long years of service, I had found another position for him within the company. Office manager. At our new warehouse and logistics facility. An hour-and-a-half commute each way, in the middle of an industrial park that was mostly dust and tumbleweeds. It wasn't technically a demotion, the salary was even a few percentage points higher to account for the travel. But we both knew exactly what it was. It was an exile. Tears welled in his eyes. "Ellie, please," he started, his voice cracking. "I am so sorry." "Save it, Arthur," I said, my voice cold and flat. I swiveled my chair to face my computer screen, a clear and final dismissal. "Your personal items will be packed and delivered to your new office by Friday." He stood there for a long, silent moment, then turned and walked out, a broken man. I felt a flicker of something, but it wasn't pity. It was the grim satisfaction of a task completed. Then came the house. Our home. I hired a moving company to come on a weekend I knew I would be out of town for a previously scheduled business conference. I sent Danny a single, unemotional text, "Movers will be at the house on Saturday at 9 a.m. Your belongings will be packed and moved to your father's new address by Sunday evening. Please leave your house key on the kitchen counter." He didn't reply. When I returned late Sunday night, the house was different. It was silent. It felt lighter. I walked through the rooms, the empty spaces in the closets, the bare surfaces where his things used to be. The silence wasn't lonely, it was a comforting, cleansing balm. The final piece of the legal puzzle was the financial settlement. My lawyer drafted the papers, and I instructed him to be more than fair. Danny received half the equity in the house and a generous alimony agreement that would last for 3 years, more than enough time for him to get back on his feet. I didn't want a protracted fight. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to sever every last tie with the precision of a surgeon. Throughout this period, I stayed in close contact with Warren. We spoke on the phone almost every day, becoming each other's lifeline. We'd swap stories about our respective lawyer meetings, strategize about the next steps. He had started the difficult process of separating from Vanessa, documenting every instance of her abuse, meticulously building his case for sole custody of the children. We were 2 soldiers in the same war, fighting on different fronts. One evening, about a month after Danny had officially moved out, Warren called me, his voice tight with panic. "She knows," he said, his words rushed. "She knows you and I have been talking. Danny must have told her everything." "What did she do, Warren?" I asked, my stomach twisting into a cold knot. She just exploded. She came home and started screaming, throwing things. She accused me of having an affair with you, of plotting against her. Then she locked me out of the house. The kids are still in there with her, Ellie. I'm just sitting in my car down the street. I called the police, but they said it's a domestic dispute and they can't do anything unless she becomes violent. I don't know what to do. A cold, clear rage, unlike anything I had ever felt before, settled over me. Stay right where you are, Warren. Don't move. I'm on my way. My military training had taught me many things, but one of the most important was how to de-escalate a volatile, high-stakes situation. Or, if de-escalation failed, how to end it. When I pulled up to his quiet suburban street 20 minutes later, I could hear her shouting from inside the house, the sound ugly and jarring in the peaceful night. I walked up the stone pathway to the front door and knocked, 3 loud, firm raps. The shouting stopped instantly. A moment of tense silence, then the door was wrenched open. And there she was. Vanessa. She looked different than the ghost in my high school memories. Harder. Angrier. But the same sneer of contempt was etched on her lips. What the hell do you want? She spat, blocking the doorway. I want you to let your husband back into his home, and I want to see for myself that your children are okay, I said, my voice calm, even, and completely devoid of emotion. She let out a harsh, ugly laugh. This is none of your damn business, you washed-up old soldier. Get off my property before I call the cops. Go ahead, I said, taking a small step forward, not backing down an inch. Call them. I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear about your ongoing affair with your stepbrother. And while they're here, I'm sure they'd be fascinated to see the lovely bruises on your husband's arms. I have pictures, Vanessa. Very clear ones. The color drained from her face. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She had made the same mistake they all had. She had underestimated me. They saw a quiet businesswoman, a betrayed wife. They had forgotten what I was before all that. I was a soldier. And you never, ever back a soldier into a corner. Wordlessly, she stepped aside. I walked into the house. The living room was a disaster zone, a lamp overturned, a framed family photo shattered on the floor. I found the 2 children huddled together at the top of the stairs, their eyes wide and terrified. I knelt down, keeping my voice soft and steady, and spoke to them until the fear began to recede from their faces, until Warren was back inside, and the immediate crisis had passed. As I left that night, Vanessa stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching me with an expression of pure, undiluted hatred. I met her gaze without flinching. I knew then that this wasn't over. She had drawn a new line in the sand. And I knew, with a chilling, absolute certainty, that I was going to be the one to cross it. The piece of paper from the court was anticlimactic. Dissolution of marriage. Just like that, 6 years of my life were reduced to a legal filing number. But I didn't feel free. The opposite, in fact. I felt tethered to the mess Vanessa had created. Every time I spoke to Warren, I could hear the escalating fear in his voice. The divorce proceedings had turned ugly. Vanessa was fighting him for everything, contesting his claim for custody, draining his savings with endless legal motions. She was a scorched earth fighter, willing to burn everything down, including her own children's stability, just to win. The abuse was getting worse. He told me she'd thrown a heavy book at him during an argument, leaving a deep, bleeding cut over his eye. He'd had to get stitches. He was documenting everything, his lawyer was building a case, but the wheels of the legal system grind agonizingly slow. I knew, with a soldier's certainty, that we didn't have time. He and those children were in danger. One night, I was sitting alone in my quiet, empty house. And a switch flipped in my brain. The civilian part of me, the part that believed in lawyers and court dates and due process, went silent. And the other part, the part that had been dormant for years, the part that was trained to identify a threat and neutralize it, woke up. Vanessa was a threat. To Warren. To his children. My mission wasn't complete. The preparations began that weekend. I worked quietly, methodically. I used the skills and resources from my professional life for a deeply personal cause. First, I needed a vehicle. A ghost. I drove 3 hours out of state to a university town and scanned the community bulletin boards. I found what I was looking for, a flyer for an old, beat-up Ford pickup truck. The seller was a foreign exchange student, graduating and needing to leave the country in a hurry. He was desperate. I paid his modest asking price in cash. No names, no paperwork. I drove the truck to a secluded state forest, found a fire pit, and burned the handwritten bill of sale and the old title. As far as the world was concerned, the truck no longer existed. Next, the location. My mind went back to my childhood. My father, a quiet, intense man, used to take me hunting in a desolate stretch of rural country in the next state over. It was a wasteland of abandoned coal mines, slag heaps, and forgotten roads. A place where people and their unwanted things could simply disappear without a trace. I drove out there one Sunday, the old truck rattling beneath me. It was even bleaker than I remembered. It was perfect. The final piece was the bed. The heavy, king-sized sleigh bed from my marriage. The one they had defiled. Since the divorce, I had dismantled it and stored the pieces in the back of my garage. It felt like a cursed object, a monument to their betrayal. It deserved a more fitting end than a landfill. I spent a full evening in my garage, with the lights off, wearing a blindfold. I practiced assembling and disassembling the heavy wooden frame by touch alone, my hands remembering the placement of every screw, every bracket, until I could do it in under 20 minutes in total darkness. I waited. I watched. I listened. The trigger came on a Tuesday night. Warren called me, his voice a choked whisper. Vanessa had lost her temper again. This time, it was because he'd asked her to contribute to the college fund for the kids. She had pushed him. Hard. He'd fallen backward down the short flight of stairs leading to the garage. He had a sprained wrist and a badly bruised back. The children had seen the whole thing. They were screaming. That was it. That was the line. Warren, I said, my voice a calm, cold anchor in his storm. Listen to me very carefully. Take the children. Pack a small bag for each of you. Go to the Marriott Hotel near the airport. Check in under a false name and pay with cash. I will wire you more. Turn off your phones. Do not talk to anyone. Do you understand? He was terrified, but he trusted me. Yes, he whispered. Ellie, what are you going to do? I'm going to end this, I said, and hung up. My plan went into motion. Getting Vanessa to the abandoned mine was disturbingly easy. I used a cheap burner phone I'd bought for cash weeks earlier. I sent her a single text message, pretending to be a disgruntled former employee of Warren's graphic design business. I told her I had proof he was hiding assets, proof she could use to destroy him in the custody battle. Her greed and her all-consuming hatred for him made her reckless. She agreed to meet me that night, alone, at the remote location I specified. When her expensive SUV pulled up to the designated spot, a deserted crossroads miles from anywhere, she didn't realize her mistake until it was too late. I was not a disgruntled employee. And I was stronger than she remembered. Faster. And infinitely more prepared. I didn't hurt her more than was necessary to subdue and restrain her. I wanted her conscious for this. I wanted her to understand. In the dead of night, under a sliver of a moon, I drove us to the spot I had chosen. I worked in the beam of the truck's headlights. I reassembled the bed, my movements efficient and practiced. It was a grim, silent ritual. I secured her to the heavy wooden frame. She was terrified now, the arrogant sneer replaced by a raw, primal fear. She begged. She pleaded. She threatened. I didn't say a single word. I just worked. When it was all in place, I finally stood back and looked at her. "This bed is where you betrayed your family," I said, my voice strangely calm in the vast, empty landscape. "It's where you helped destroy my marriage. It's a symbol of all the pain and chaos you've caused. And now, it's your funeral pyre." I picked up the red can of gasoline. Her screams were shrill, animalistic, piercing the profound silence of the night. I emptied the can over the bed, the mattress, the wood. I struck a single match. The flames erupted with a hungry roar, a sudden, violent bloom of orange and red that consumed the bed, consumed her, consumed my past. It was a modern-day Viking funeral. A cleansing fire. I stood and watched, my face illuminated by the flickering light, until the screams finally stopped. I felt no remorse. No guilt. No pity. Only a quiet, cold, and absolute finality. The threat was neutralized. The mission was complete. Before I left, I took her phone from her purse. I powered it on and sent a single, anonymous text to a local news tip line I'd looked up earlier. "Something terrible is happening at the old Blackwood mine. You should send someone." Then I used a software tool I had on a thumb drive to wipe the phone completely clean, and I tossed it into the heart of the inferno. I drove the old pickup truck for hours, heading south on dark country roads. Just before dawn, I found what I was looking for, a dingy, 24-hour diner in a run-down strip mall. I pulled into the lot, parked the truck conspicuously under a flickering streetlight, and left the keys in the ignition. I went inside and had a slice of apple pie and a cup of black coffee. By the time I came out 20 minutes later, the truck was gone. I walked a mile to the nearest bus station and slept peacefully, without dreams, the entire way home. The authorities found what was left of Vanessa a few days later. The bizarre, ritualistic nature of the crime scene made it a local media sensation. An investigation was launched, and of course, sooner or later, they came to me. My name was inevitably linked to hers through my ex-husband. My military record, with its carefully redacted sections hinting at special operations and unconventional warfare, made me a very compelling person of interest. A detective, a sharp, weary-looking man in his 50s named Morales, was assigned to the case. He brought me in for questioning. He was good, I'll give him that. He was methodical, intelligent, and his eyes missed nothing. He questioned me for hours. He asked about my alibi for the night of the fire. I told him the truth, or a version of it. I had been at a remote, off-grid cabin I owned in the mountains. There was no cell service, no internet. It was a place I went to be alone. It was also completely unverifiable. He asked what had happened to the king-sized sleigh bed from my master bedroom. I told him I'd donated it to a Goodwill charity center during my divorce and even produced a carefully forged donation receipt to back up my story. They checked, of course. The center confirmed they had received a bed matching the description. But it had been sold for cash a week later. The trail went cold. He asked about my past, about my specialized training. "It says here you were awarded a Silver Star, Ms. Vance," he said, sliding a copy of my service record across the metal table. "For actions above and beyond the call of duty. It says you single-handedly eliminated multiple hostile targets to save your unit from being overrun." "That was a war, detective," I said, my voice calm. "That has nothing to do with this." "Doesn't it?" he replied, his gaze intense, trying to probe past my defenses. "It shows what you're capable of when the people you care about are threatened." It was a tense, high-stakes game of cat and mouse. He knew, on some gut level, that I was involved. And I knew that he couldn't prove a single thing. They had no weapon. They had no physical evidence. They had no witnesses. All they had was a motive and a ghost. After weeks of intense questioning and surveillance that led nowhere, the case eventually went cold. The investigation shifted to Vanessa's many other enemies, jilted lovers, business rivals, other families she had terrorized. I was just one name on a very long list. Life began to find a new, quieter rhythm. With Vanessa gone, Warren was finally able to secure full and permanent custody of his children without a fight. The change in him was remarkable. It was like watching a man who had been living through a hurricane finally step out into the sunshine. The deep weariness in his eyes was replaced by a quiet, resilient strength. He, the kids, and I started spending more time together. We were a strange, broken little group, but somehow, all our jagged edges fit together. We understood each other's scars without ever having to speak of them. We took things slowly. We had picnics in the park. We built elaborate Lego castles on the living room floor. We had movie nights with popcorn and blankets. We talked for hours, healing the broken pieces of our respective lives. He was kind and gentle, and he had a wonderfully goofy sense of humor. He made me laugh again, a real, genuine laugh, something I thought I had forgotten how to do. One sunny afternoon, we were sitting on a park bench, watching the kids chase each other around the playground. He reached over and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. "You saved me, Ellie," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the children. "You saved all of us." "No, Warren," I replied, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. "We saved each other." A few months later, on a cool autumn evening, I took him out to a fancy dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant. I was more nervous than I had been on any military mission. My heart was pounding, my palms were sweating. After we had finished our meal, I took a deep breath. Right there in the middle of the restaurant, I slid out of my chair and got down on one knee. I pulled out a small, velvet box I had been carrying in my pocket all night. "Warren," I said, my voice shaking just a little. "I have spent most of my life building fortresses to keep people out. To keep myself safe. But you didn't even try to break down the walls. You just walked right in and made it a home. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down his face as he laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Yes," he whispered. "Of course, yes. We built a new life together. A real one. A life filled with love and laughter and the beautiful, chaotic noise of two happy, healing children. The past was a scar, it would always be a part of us. But it was the fire that had forged our new beginning." About a year after we were married, I got one last, unexpected visit from Detective Morales. He came to the house on a Sunday afternoon, not as a cop, but just as a man. We sat on the back porch, sipping iced tea, watching the kids and Warren trying to build a new treehouse. He was quiet for a long time, just watching them. Then he said, his voice low, "We officially closed the Vanessa Reed case this week. It's being moved to the cold case files. Lack of evidence." I just nodded, my heart beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. "There's something you should probably know," he continued, still not looking at me. "My daughter-in-law, her first husband was a cop, my son's partner. He was killed in the line of duty. She was vulnerable, grieving. Vanessa, she was supposed to be her friend. She had an affair with my son, tried to break up their marriage. My daughter-in-law had a complete breakdown. It nearly destroyed her." He finally turned to look at me then, and in his weary eyes, I saw not suspicion, not accusation, but a deep, profound, and unspoken understanding. "The world is a better place without people like her in it," he said quietly. He stood up, placing his empty glass on the railing. He was ready to leave. At the edge of the porch, he turned back. "I never found a single shred of proof, Eleanor. Not one thing to tie you to that place. But for what it's worth, for my family," he paused, as if searching for the right words, the safe words. Then, he just gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. A silent acknowledgement that passed between two people who understood the difference between the law and justice. "No, Eleanor," he said finally, his voice full of a meaning that no one else would ever understand. "Thank you." He turned and walked away, leaving me there on the porch as the sun began to set. I watched my husband and my children, my family, and a sense of peace settled over me, deeper and more profound than any high-tech security system I could ever design. My fortress had been breached. My world had been burned to the ground. But from the ashes, I had built something far better. I had built a home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you've been through something that broke you, if you've ever felt like your world was falling apart and you had to find the strength to rebuild, please know that you are not alone. And you are so much stronger than you think. Please, feel free to share your own thoughts or stories in the comments below. I read every one. Take care of yourselves and each other.